Alright, welcome back to Flight Sim 2020 and welcome to a lovely rainy wet day here at Durban King Sharker. So in today's video we are taking a look at the recently released FS2Crew for the PMDG 737. Now first things first, I am going to be going over some of the very basics of FS2Crew. So if you're already familiar with FS2Crew, you might want to skip ahead. I'm going to start off with explaining what FS2Crew is, and then we'll have a look at the interface, and then we'll go through a full flight from start to finish. There will be timestamps at the bottom, so if you want to skip ahead to a specific part of the video, you can do that below. Right, so if you are brand new to FS2Crew and haven't used it before, FS2Crew is a third-party application that gives you a virtual first officer and a virtual cabin crew. So you assume the role of the captain and the software plays the role of the first officer. You can interact with your crew using either voice or button control. And the idea behind this is an aircraft like the 737 is never designed to operate with a single pilot. You always have a multi-crew, and this software is one of the best ways to get the multi-crew experience, or as close as we can get to it within the confines of the simulator. So your virtual first officer is going to run checklists with you. They will do all of the flows and procedures that the first officer will do in reality, and you can interact with them and give them commands via the interface or using voice commands. Now, FS2Crew have said that this is one of the most detailed and one of the biggest releases of FS2Crew because we have over 15 different voices, so you can choose the kind of accent of your crew, where they're from in the world, and sometimes within some of those regions you get different variations, so different voice actors that have been recorded. My understanding is they will most likely add more, but this is one of the biggest releases in terms of availability there. And as always, it's available from fs2crew.com. It's currently €24.95. That will be increased after the launch price ends to €29.95, I believe. But as always, I will leave a link to the product down below in the description. Another thing to point out is that this is SOP 1, so Standard Operating Procedures 1, and this follows the kind of stock Boeing procedures for the 737. There will be added airline variations of the SOPs coming in the future. And what this means is if you are used to following the SOPs of a specific airline, things might be slightly different for you in the way that the procedures and the flows are run and things like that. But obviously it's designed by Boeing. It's the kind of generic one, so it's just going to be the kind of standard procedures for the 737. Right, I think that's enough of an introduction, so let's jump into the first section where we have a look at the interface. So once you've installed it and set it up, you can launch it either by just running the software itself outside of the simulator, but we can also run it from within the sim if we just go up to the FS2Crew Command Center here in the toolbar. And just to note, the command center needs to be running in the background for this to work. But if we go through to this, we get a list of the FS2Crew products here, and we can scroll down to the 737, launch the application from there, and wait for that to fire up. Okay, and once the software is launched, we are presented with an interface like this. So what I'm going to do quickly, just for the case of this video, is I'm just going to make the panel a bit bigger so it's easier to read some of the stuff that we're dealing with. Now, if you've already used FS2Crew for one of the flight sim products, the Phoenix A320, the Fly-by-Wire A320NX, or the Aerosoft CRJ, or Pushback Express, you are most likely familiar with this interface. However, if you are coming from FS2Crew in P3D or FSX, this is going to be completely new to you. So again, if you are already familiar with the interface, you may have watched my previous video when the A320NX version came out, you can skip ahead in the video. However, if you're not sure about how this interface works, we're going to go through it step by step. Right, so very quickly, we'll go through the buttons that we have at the top. This little green one in the top left just allows you to kind of reduce the size and the screen real estate that interface takes up, and you can always click on it to expand it again. The next one is our settings, which we're going to come back to in a bit because we're going to go through a whole bunch of things there. We also have the manual panel, which you can open up with checklists and things inside it. Then the assist panel and the info center panel we're also going to come back to later because they're very important. If you have Pushback Express installed, you can run that through the interface here by clicking this. So when you're ready to set up your pushback, you can click on that and it will open Pushback Express. It just saves you going through to the toolbar. Okay, the departure and approach briefing panel. If you don't want to make up your own briefing, you can have FS2Crew read it out for you, so you set a bunch of settings. This is important though, because some of the options that you get here will determine some of the choices that the first officer makes. So for example, when you do the approach briefing, whichever auto brake setting you choose in these options, that is what the first officer will set when he goes through that flow. So I do recommend that you come through and actually set this up correctly. Okay, we then have the pre-flight events button. So this is where we kind of start the whole flight process. So with the 737, we can either click on the clock or we can actually just say, let's start setting up, and that will begin a 30-minute process where yourself and your virtual first officer go through all the procedures of prepping for the flight and then ending with pushing back and taxiing out to the runway. Okay, next to that, we have the restart speech recognition engine button. This is just if something has gone wrong with the speech recognition engine. Now again, FS2Crew uses the Windows speech recognition. So you're gonna have to set that up and do the voice training. It's very quick to set up, although it does take 5-6 minutes or so to read through the different prompts to train the system with your voice, but it's well worth doing and it will improve your experience with the voice recognition. But again, we're only going to click this if something goes wrong with the voice, if it gets stuck on some command for some reason. Right, then we have the manual flow selector. So if we open this up, this allows us to select a specific flow from the menu. So if you have done something out of order, or you've kind of fallen behind the process and the prompts have kind of skipped ahead and you're kind of not sure where you are, or you want to start a specific flow for whatever reason, you can come and do that manually from here. Most of the time I find that I don't really use this. If you follow the processes and keep up with the flight and with your first officer, you don't need to do anything manually here. But if you do, for whatever reason, need to trigger a specific flow, you can do it through the flow menu. Right, then this little button just hides the top or the upper panel, so that just gets rid of all the buttons. And again, this is just to help you make your interface more compact. Next up, we have the QR code window, which pops open a QR code, which you can use to control this interface from another device. So you can put it on a tablet or a phone, and it just means you don't have to have this over your actual screen where you are simming. You can have this on another device in front of you. Again, if you have a second screen, you can always just drag this onto the other screen, but that gives you some options. Okay, the kill switch. This is if any of the flows or your first officer kind of gets stuck doing something or something strange happens and you just want to kind of kill all processes that are currently going on, you can click on that. To be honest, I haven't really used that much, but if you do run into a situation like that, this is the button that you will use. Okay, the pin button, make sure that this window always stays on top. So even if you're opening other applications besides Flight Sim, this window will stay on top. If we unpin that, we get the option to minimize it down to our taskbar. Okay, I'm going to keep mine pinned, and then obviously we can exit it over here. If we close the software, we're going to have to go back up to the toolbar to open it again. Right, now let's jump back to the three kind of most important sections that we need to take a look at. So first, we're going to go through the config, which is essentially the settings, and we will go through this step by step. Now, again, like in my previous tutorials, I'm going to mention some of the options here, but not all of them, because a lot of the options that you get here are personal preference based on how you want to fly or how your system is set up. I'm going to go through the most important things that you really need to be aware of in order for the software to work. So if we take something like the boarding sounds, for example, you know, whether you choose to have the sounds of passengers or the sounds of music or not isn't really going to affect your flight. That's a personal preference. But things like how we set up voice control and how we set up our sound is very important. Right, so first is our audio output device. Now, again, this is just setting where you want to hear the output of FS2Crew. So where you will hear your first officer speaking, where you will hear your cabin crew speaking. Again, if you just have this set to default, if you have a very simple audio setup, that's going to work just fine. Mine is a little bit more complex because I need to output this to the right place so that I can record the sounds for the video. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up. And if you want to check that it's working, all you have to do is click over here
Audio test complete.
And if you hear the audio test, you're good to go. You can adjust the volumes of different things here. So we have the crew, that's your first officer. We have the cabin crew volume for them, and the environment volume is like your passenger boarding sounds and things like that. So you can tweak those as you go. Right, next, very important, here we choose our interface method, so we can use button control, voice control, or auto respond. Again, I haven't really played with auto respond, and I haven't used button control too much. Voice control to me is the most immersive kind of experience, although pretty much everything that I'm saying here will apply to all of them. It's just a different way of interacting with the interface. So for example, with voice control, we're of course going to use voice recognition. So we're going to give voice prompts and voice responses to checklists. Whereas, for example, in button control, to respond to checklists, you will use one of your two buttons. If you are going to use button control, you need to assign a main key and a secondary key. That gives you two kind of options. So for example, we can trigger events with the main key, but if we have some sort of event that requires two answers, so if your first officer says, should we turn off the seatbelt signs, you have a main and a secondary to say yes or no. So you can assign those to any keys on your keyboard or joystick as you see fit if you're going to use button control. I'm going to be going through voice control. Again, that's the way that I prefer to use it. So once we've selected voice control, we also have the option for open microphone mode. Now, if you've come again from FSX and P3D, open mic mode was pretty much how it always worked. But now you also have the option of doing push to talk. So if I deselect this, we will get another option here, which is push to talk. And that means kind of like when you speak to ATC, every time you want to speak to your first officer, you need to hold down a button and you can assign any button to do that. To me, that's a little unnatural. It is realistic to do that when you're speaking to ATC, but when you're speaking to the first officer in the cockpit, you want to be able to just speak. To be able to do that, we can have open microphone mode. There's a couple of things to be wary of with this mode. However, this means that your first officer is always listening. So for example, now if I go and close this window, you will see I have mine muted. We'll take a look at how that works, because when I'm speaking to you guys, my first officer is listening, and if I happen to mention any phrases or it detects any phrases, I might trigger some events that I don't want to trigger at this time. So for most people, if you're not streaming or recording videos, you probably aren't talking very much when you're sitting in front of the computer flying, so you might be able to leave this on. However, when you do things like briefings, if you want to actually speak your briefing out loud, or if you are recording a video or streaming and talking to your audience or talking to someone else in your room, it's a good idea to have this muted so that you don't pick up any commands. Again, you could also just use push to talk, which means you hold down the key every time you want to speak to your first officer. Whatever works for you. Let's take a look at how to assign these keys. So it works the same for all of the options. So we'll just take a look at one of them. I will just quickly explain the difference between a hard mute and soft mute. So if you see, my hard mute is assigned to the key X. When this little microphone icon is yellow, it means it's muted. You can also click on it to mute and unmute. But hard mute means if I push the X key, it toggles between muted and unmuted, right? So it's muted now. If I push X, it's now unmuted. And there you see it's picking up commands because I'm speaking. If I push X again, it's now muted. Soft mute is kind of like your push to talk, but in reverse. So if you assign a key to soft mute, it means as long as you're holding down the key, it's muted. When you let go, it's then unmuted. So again, it's just different options. You choose what works for you. Right, so let's have a look at how we go ahead and assign a key. Very simple. There's a couple of steps that you need to do. It's not a case of just clicking in the box. We need to click on assignment, and then we need to say start scan, push the key on your joystick or on your keyboard that you want to use. And then, very important, once you've done that, make sure to click save, and that key is now assigned to that command. Underneath, we get the panel size, which allows you to control how big these panels are going to be, and your opacity. So you can make this kind of see-through, or you can make it completely solid like this. Again, up to you. This information at the bottom, I would recommend you leave alone unless you have some sort of issue and you get in contact with support and they tell you to change something there. I wouldn't touch anything. I've never, ever had to change any of those options, and everything has worked fine for me. So I would recommend just leaving those as is. Okay, now we get to more of the kind of user preference option. So here, most of these commands, except for one or two, which I'll point out, don't make a huge difference to how the flight actually runs, other than just changing your user experience. However, the very important ones are this command for disable gear and flap control. If this is selected, when you command your first officer to set flaps 5 or gear up, for example, he won't actually move the flaps or the gear levers in the aircraft. This is there if you have hardware gear and flap controls with discrete positions. So if you have a controller that has a position for flaps 1, 2, 3, etc., then having the first officer set the gear commands means that the gear lever in the aircraft is not going to match the gear lever on your hardware. In that case, you would have to disable this, give the first officer the flap or gear command, and then actually physically move the lever on your hardware. If you don't have hardware with discrete positions for gear and flaps, then have this deselected, and that means when you call for flaps or gear, the first officer will actually trigger those commands in the aircraft. Okay, the next one that you should have on is enable first officer flows. That's kind of the whole point of the software, but that means the first officer is going to go through and perform the actual flows that a first officer in the 737 would. Right, now, for those of you unfamiliar with this newer interface, this is going to be a very important one for you, and that is the enable tooltips option. So you may have noticed we don't really get the same kind of manuals that we used to back in FSX and P3D, where you'd get a nice big PDF manual. Now it's actually far more concise, because all of that information that you need is built here into the interface, and it's done through tooltips. So with enable tooltips on, if you want to know what anything does or what it is, all you have to do is mouse over it, and you will get a tooltip explaining that function to you. This makes it a lot easier than having to try and scroll through a PDF manual trying to find this exact function. All you have to do is place your mouse over it. However, once you've gotten to the point where you know the software and you've done a whole bunch of flights, this can get a little bit annoying, so you can then turn it off, and now mousing over anything doesn't bring up the tooltips. When you first start though, to get used to the interface, it's really nice to have this on so you can quickly go, oh, should I choose this option? Well, the FO is going to run that procedure. I want that. I will then turn it on. Okay, and then the rest of this is pretty much up to you. We have our language options. So again, there's a whole bunch of different voices that you can choose from different countries. And within some of the countries, we get different people that we can choose from. Each of them will have a different voice. That's completely up to you. We get to choose for the captain. Now, you might be thinking, why would I choose a voice for the captain? Because, well, I'm the captain. When you do things like your briefings, it gets read out in the captain's voice. So this would be the voice of your captain when reading out the briefings. The first officer, obviously, when you're running through checklists, when you're performing commands, that will be the voice of your first officer. And then you have the cabin crew as well, and you get a whole bunch of different options for that. Okay, then flight options underneath, we have two tabs here. I missed this the first time I ran through the software, so we actually have page 1, 2, and then our callouts. We can choose which callouts the first officer actually gives. Same with the second page. Go through all of those and decide which ones you would like. Right, then inside the software, you also have the option to ask the first officer to contact ATC for the various phases of flight. So requesting pushback, requesting takeoff, things like that. Note that it does not currently interface with anything like VATSIM or the built-in Microsoft Flight Simulator ATC. At the moment, it is purely for aesthetics. If you want to do that, it just means when you ask the first officer to contact ATC, that's the call sound they will use. Right, and then our boarding sounds. If you want to have the sound of passengers boarding the plane, you can select that. You can have no sounds. For example, if you're running something like PAC-X, it has its own boarding sounds. You might want to turn that off. If you choose cabin boarding music, obviously it will play music. Just note that you cannot have both selected at the same time. You need to choose one or none. Right, so now we've had a good look at the config options. Let's take a look at the next two tools that are going to be very important for you, particularly when you are learning FS2Crew for the first couple of flights, to get familiar with the voice prompts and the flows and procedures that you need to perform. So what's going to help you with that is the assist panel and the info center. So the assist panel is this information that we have underneath. And I think this is absolutely vital for anyone using FS2Crew when you first get FS2Crew, regardless of which aircraft you're getting it for. What this gives you is a checklist assist, voice command assist, and a flow assist. So let's actually start at the bottom. The flow assist is going to tell you as the captain what flows you should be performing at this stage of the flight. So it's saying here, we haven't triggered the pre-flight events. So what we should think about doing is clicking on the pre-flight events to actually trigger the flight to start. So as you are progressing through the flight, when you are learning the software, take a look over here, because that's going to prompt you as to what processes you should be following, what flows you should be performing at that stage. Right, then if we come to voice command assist, what we get here is a list of voice commands that are most likely appropriate to this stage of flight. Again, you can use any voice command at any point during the flight, but this is going to say, this is probably what commands you should be thinking about giving now. So these are what flows you should be doing on your own, but anything that you should be prompting the first officer to do via voice command, that will appear here. So for example, at the beginning of our flight, it's probably a good idea to ask him to get our ATC clearance, because that's what you would do right in the beginning. So that's the voice command assist. Then finally, we have the checklist assist. When you are currently busy with a checklist, and again, when you should be running a checklist, that will appear here. So it will pop up and say, before start checklist. When you then trigger that command, you get the checklist response options over here in checklist assist. When the first officer gives you a challenge, the possible responses that you can give will all appear here in the checklist assist, and you can choose the most appropriate one. One thing I will mention is, again, because this uses the Microsoft speech recognition, you will sometimes run into situations where the speech recognition struggles to pick up a specific word or phrase. If that happens where you get stuck and it doesn't want to pick up the specific command, you can always use set and checked to move on to the next command. Right, so that is our assist panel. Let's move on to the info center, which appears at the bottom, and we get a whole bunch of information that we can have over here. So overview, this is kind of just explaining what FS2Crew is. We get logs, so these are all of your speech logs, so you can actually use this to check if FS2Crew is correctly picking up a specific phrase that you are trying to use. And then we have some general speech stats, links to various FS2Crew pages, and information about the current version, etc. One thing I found a little strange is there is more information that you get here, but I've only been able to access this by hiding that menu and showing it again. And now we get the kind of really important stuff. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be like that, or if that's a bug, or if it's got something to do with my screen resolution. But if you get here and you only got the MISC setting at the bottom, if you want the actual voice control commands, just click on this little button which hides the menu items, and opening it up should allow you to see that. This is important because what they have in here is, under checklists, they have a list of all of the checklists that you need to perform throughout the flight, pre-flight, before start, etc., etc. And then also some general commands that you can use at any point when busy with a checklist. So if you've run the wrong checklist, you can always cancel that checklist. That will just stop running that checklist altogether. If you kind of lose your place and you aren't sure where you are, you can restart the checklist from the beginning by speaking restart checklist. If you've given a command that you did by mistake, or you decide you don't want that to be done anymore, you can say cancel last command. So if you've given, for example, a heading change or an altitude change before the first officer starts doing that, you can say cancel last command and they will stop doing that. Right, then we have a bunch of commands that we can give to the first officer. So again, we have some more options for checklists. Hold the checklist means you will just pause and then resume when you want to resume. Cancel, if you missed what he said with the previous command, you don't have to start right from the beginning. You can say repeat last or say last. Again, you can say start again or restart from the beginning. So some more options that you have for checklists with the first officer. Then you have a whole bunch of commands that you can give to the first officer at any point during the flight, but these are all various commands that you can give to the first officer. One thing I will point out that is different to other FS2Crew software is these autopilot commands. So the way they've done it for the 737 is if you are the pilot flying and the autopilot is engaged, you are the one who should be making autopilot changes on the MCP. So for example, if the autopilot is engaged and you say set heading, the first officer won't actually do it. In other versions of FS2Crew, they will. So this is going to take a little bit of getting used to. But I understand why they've done it, because it is realistic. You are the pilot flying, so you should be the one who makes changes to the autopilot. When you are hand flying, so when the autopilot is disengaged, then you can give these autopilot commands to the first officer and he will set them for you. To get to the autopilot functions quickly, you can come here to autopilot. We have the same stuff, but it's all just in a separate tab, so it's easy to find because these are probably some of the most commonly used ones. There's a lot of stuff here, so this is going to take a few flights to kind of remember all of the things that you can ask the first officer to do. We can also give the purser a few commands. Again, very often this doesn't really do anything in terms of the flight itself. It's more of just an immersion and a personal preference thing. So you can ask for tea and coffee and lunch and juice and water, and you can give them some various information about departing, arriving late, go around, diversions, things like that. Where these lines are blank, you can say anything you want. These specific words are what FS2Crew is looking for to trigger that command, and the purser will respond to you if you give these commands. Right, so I think that brings us to the end of the interface tutorial. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to jump into the aircraft and we're going to run through a full flight from here in Durban up to Joburg. So nice short flight that we can do in one go, and we're going to run through the flight from start to finish using FS2Crew. Alright, so if you skipped over the interface section and are just jumping into the full flight, welcome to the video. And we are going to be leaving a wet and rainy Durban and heading up to what I believe is a nice, clear Johannesburg or Tambo. So let's go and launch our interface. Okay, so let's jump aboard the aircraft. And let's trigger the pre-flight events. So again, under the flows assist, it is telling us we can click on the clock. Oh, it's actually not telling us now. It's telling us we can use voice. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's start setting up.
Roger.
Right, so our first officer is now going to do the electrical power-up supplementary procedure. Again, these are all things that your 737 first officer would do in reality. So he's going to go ahead and get us onto APU power. So he's going to test all of the fire stuff. And once he's happy with all of that, he will fire up the APU and put the APU on the buses. At this point, we would be going through what the captain should be going through. And in this case, we will set up the MCDU. Once the first officer is done with that, when the APU is running and the APU is on the bus, he's going to head out into the rain and do the walk around. And then he'll spend a few minutes outside doing the actual walk around, and he'll let us know when he's back. So while that's happening, let's go and actually start with the CDU setup. So what I'm actually going to do is just set up the fuel, and why is this in pounds? Okay, so we fixed that. We're now in kgs. We need 5602 for today's flight, and our payload zero fuel weight is 52.5. So let's set that. Cool, we're good to go. And the first officer has now got our APU up and running, and APU is on the bus. So shortly he will go out to do his walk around, and we're going to carry on setting up our flight for today. So we would double check that this is all correct. And then, okay, he hasn't set the IRS selectors just yet, but he should do that shortly. Okay, another thing I should mention is because we've run that procedure, the first officer's pre-flight procedure has now kicked in. That's where you'll set the IRS. If you want to speed this up, and obviously that kicks in as I try and explain this, but if you want to speed up the time, this is showing that we have 22 minutes left until all of the procedures are done. If you want to speed it up, for example, if you find you are sitting waiting and both you and the first officer are not doing anything, you can always click on the number to speed up 1 minute at a time. However, when your first officer is busy with something, it will go red like this, and if I click on it now, nothing will happen. Be careful with just clicking and spamming it and going really quickly, because especially if you are using the assists to know how to progress through the flight, if you keep clicking through and you pass you pass through a stage of the flight without doing it and move on to the next one because you're advancing the time, you will have missed that prompt and it will disappear and be replaced by the next one. So if you're going to go too quickly through this, it's easy for you to kind of miss out on things that you should be doing. So for example, if I can just click this twice, and we've now got 20 minutes left instead of 22. Right, let's just check. He did set, right, he set our RS to nav, so we can come down here and actually finish doing this. He's gone out for the walk around now in the rain. Perks of being a captain. Virtual captain, I guess. Okay, our route for today, we are going from Durban up to Joburg, and we are Springbok 1324. Right, and then we'll just enter our flight plan manually.
Hi,
so
the security and safety checks are all done. Are you good to start boarding?
go for it.
Okay.
Right, so there's our purser just letting us know they want to start getting passengers on board, and they will now do so. Okay, what was I doing? We're going to Greytown, not Guadalcanal, and then UZ29 to Standerton. Nice and simple. Okay, we'll activate that. Let's do our departure. And this is really cool because in reality, this is how it would work. You know, one pilot would be busy setting things up in the cockpit, prepping the route, while the other pilot does the walk around. If you watched any of my previous videos flying the PMDG B737, it took really long to get the flight set up because on my own, I would have to do both the first officer's procedures and the captain's procedures. Now we have a virtual first officer who does that role for us. Right, we are landing. Is it 3 right? Yes, 03 right. I'm sure ILS Whiskey will be fine. We'll double check that on the charts just now. And we are obviously doing... which one did they give us? Charlie? Yeah, 1 Charlie. Right, 03 wait, we can enter reserves for today. I was going to say I read that wrong. It's not 5.3, it's 1. Cost index is probably 5, which it is. And we are going to 320. Pretty short flight. These flights between Durban and Joburg, you pretty much just reach your top of climb and then it's time to descend. The cabin crew normally just have enough time to quickly run through and give people drinks and snacks and things. Okay, wind 240. 56. And minus 39. Okay, we'll do how about 40 today on the assumed temperature, and of course flaps 5, config, CG, and we'll set our trim 4.39, which is about there-ish. And we don't have V-speeds, which is interesting, because I didn't actually choose a runway here. Great job. Right, now we have V-speeds. So V1 128, rotate 130, V2 140. Okay, let's just come into the legs and have a look and see why it's complaining. It should be okay now. We'll do our own vectors there. Right, again, I'm not going to go through all of the kind of flight procedures. The goal of this video is to get through FS2Crew mainly. Right, so we've done all of that. We'll leave it on that page, and we can come up here and set V2 to, well, set our MCP to 140 because that is our V2. And we'll also switch on our flight director. When the first officer returns from his walk around, he will let us know, and then what I want to show you is the flows assist, which is going to give us an idea of what we should be doing at that point. So we'll wait a couple of minutes until the first officer...
Back. No issues on the walk around.
Never mind, he's back. So let's go through. And here you can see this is the first officer is going to go through his own pre-flight procedure, which we can see he's busy doing now. And we can hear him flicking switches and testing things in the background. This is what we should be doing. So we want to test our master lights, which are these guys. Cool, and you can see there he's busy setting window heats. Okay, that's checked. We also want to have everything set up here, so let's flip this over and just set 1021. We can bring this down, position and data can come on. The rest of that is cool. Mode control panel is all checked. Those are normal, these are normal. Okay, we'll do our oxygen test. That's checked. Flight and standby instruments. Okay, those are blank. We have flight director displayed there, 1021, and this we can flip over 1021.
Glide slow.
Okay, he set the auto brake to RTO. He's reset fuel,
Wind
and
shear.
now he's doing
Wind shear.
tests.
Wind shear. Terrain. Pull up.
Okay, that's done.
Airspeed.
That's done. Parking brake.
Sink rate. Pull up. Terrain. Pull up. Don't sink. Don't sink. Too low. Terrain.
100, 50, 30,
Okay, parking
90,
brake is set.
10.
Nav radios we don't really need for our
Wind shear.
departure.
Wind shear. Wind shear. Too low. Terrain.
Audio control panel, we don't actually have to do anything.
Terrain.
Trims are set. We have 4.3 there, and we
Terrain.
have 0,
Pull
and that's
up.
zeroed out. And flight plan is set. Cool, so we're done with our pre-flight procedure, and I'm sure he will be done shortly as well. Okay, the other thing I'll do is just come and engage these. Oh, I can't yet because he hasn't put his flight director on.
TCAS test pass.
Okay, then I might as well go and set this. I can dial this all the way up to 32,000 because we're going to go straight up to cruise.
Hi, here's a fuel slip.
Thanks.
Welcome. Have a nice flight.
Okay, so he hasn't set his flight director. I'm just going to turn it on. I don't know if that's because I put mine on first or why, but we'll turn it on just so that I can do this now. So that's something to just be aware of. Now, in the other FS2Crew versions, you didn't actually have to do these ATC requests, but I have noticed that if you are using the assists at the moment, without doing these, it doesn't actually progress to the next stage. So I would recommend doing these now for that to actually work. Request ATC clearance.
Good morning, Springbok 1. Springbok 1. It's at the gate with the numbers. Requesting ATC clearance.
And you'll see now that
cleared
we've
to our
done that,
destination as filed. Score
we
code
can
is as
ask for the
assigned.
pre-flight
Springbok
checklist.
1.
I mean, if you know the pre-flight checklist is coming up, then you don't have to do that. But I found that this prompt but it does seem like this prompt only appears after you've done the ATC request. So again, if you're just going through it and you know what's coming next, you could also just open this up and see which checklist you should be doing next. And so we've just done, well, we're on the first one, so you could do it like that without having to do the ATC. Again, whatever kind of suits you. Okay, let's do the pre-flight checklist. Pre-flight checklist.
Oxygen.
Tested 100%.
Tested 100%. Navigation transfer and display switches. Normal auto. Windows heat. On. Pressurization mode selector. Auto. Flight instruments.
Okay, let's wait there for a bit, just so I can point out what I mentioned in the interface section. Now that we're running through the checklist, every time he gives a challenge, I get a list of different options that I can use to respond to that. So you can choose anything from here. Obviously, if you choose cancel, it's going to stop the whole checklist. If you choose restart, it will start from the beginning. And the last two will get him to repeat the last question. But any of the top ones, you can answer. So if I had to say heading, Heading 333, altimeter 1021, that will trigger him a positive response and he'll move on to the next item. If I just say altimeter 1021, same thing will happen. And if for whatever reason my voice recognition is not picking up either of those things, I can always say set and checked and it will move on. Altimeter 1021. Altimeter 1021.
Heading 333. Altimeter 1021. Parking brake.
Set.
Engine start lever.
Cut off.
Pre-flight checklist completed.
Right, so now our pre-flight check is complete. And now at this point, we would realistically be waiting for our passengers to board. So if you're running something like PackX again, you would wait for that to complete. But if we get to a position like we are now where we're both doing nothing, again, we can come and click here to progress. And as soon as it comes up with something, stop so that you can deal with that and then carry on. Thank you.
No problem. Have a safe flight.
Are you ready for the departure brief?
Go ahead.
Now, if you don't want to do a briefing, you don't have to. As soon as you say any questions, that will end this process and move you on to the next one. So you could just not say anything and do any questions. If you want to, you could actually do a full brief, or you can come here and let's go ahead and set this up correctly. So yes, we're pushing back from a gate. We're doing assumed temperature. We don't need the APU on. We can choose between NADP 1 or 2. Let's just do 1. Leads will be on. Anti-ice not required. It is the first flight of the day. And if we have to return, I believe would be underway. Again, I'm not going through all of this in detail. I just want to try and keep this as concise as possible. Procedures, SID, and threats, we can definitely say where there is a threat. And then if we run it, again, that will then speak in the captain's voice that you chose in the config. So let's do that.
Are you ready for the departure brief?
Go ahead.
Okay, it's going to be a standard pushback and start off the gate. Taxi route will be assigned by ATC. It'll be a left seat takeoff, using an assumed temperature, planning a flaps 5 takeoff. Anti-ice will be off. Standard reject actions to V1 as briefed. From V1, or if the call is to continue, I will continue the takeoff as per the standard company procedures. We are under our maximum landing weight, so we are okay to make an immediate return. The departure routing will be via the ATC assigned SID, complying with all published speed and altitude restrictions. We'll use NADP1. LNAV is armed. VNAV is armed. LNAV and VNAV are armed. Flight directors are on. Mine is master, yours is slave. Navigation radios are set. The NOTAMs and the aircraft defect log have been reviewed. The current weather poses a threat. We won't rush any procedures today. Any questions, comments, or concerns?
No questions.
Departure brief complete.
So there's my New Zealand accent captain, which sounds nothing like me. But anyway, let's go ahead and progress this.
Hey guys, all packs are on board. Are we clear to close?
Clear to close.
Thanks. Let me know if you need anything.
Right, first officer is now running the before start procedure. What I'm going to do is set up for our pushback, and we're going to use Pushback Express. This is a FS2Crew tutorial after all.
around you. Portable electronic equipment such as games, computing and word processing equipment may interfere with the aircraft systems and must be switched off during takeoff and landing. Portable telephones must be switched off for the duration of the flight. Please fasten your seatbelts ready for departure and make yourself comfortable.
Okay, let's jump outside and just quickly set this. Just want to check something. So we need to push nose left. Cool. Okay, that'll do. Flight deck to ground.
Go ahead, flight deck.
We will be ready shortly.
Roger.
Request pushback and then start clearance.
Ground, Springbok 1, requesting
You
pushback
can
and
use
start clearance.
Pushback Express and FS2Crew at the same time. The
Okay,
commands
clear
are
to
set
push
up in
and
such a
start.
way that they
Springbok
shouldn't
1.
interfere with each other. Before start checklist.
Flight deck door closed and locked. MCP.
V2140, heading 333, altitude 320.
Takeoff speeds.
V2140,
CDU pre-flight.
completed.
Rudder and aileron trim.
Free and 0,
Taxi and takeoff briefing.
completed.
Anti-collision light on. Before start checklist completed.
Start sequences 1 and 2.
Check.
Okay, we are good to go. Let's just double check that he's turned the beacon on, which he has. And now we can go ahead and push back and start the engines. Flight deck to ground.
Go ahead, flight deck.
Oh, okay. Before we do that, we need to do this. Get rid of the chocks. Because otherwise, our pushback isn't going to happen. Right, now we should be good to go. We are ready for pushback and engine start.
Roger. Release the parking brakes, please.
Brakes released.
Pushing back.
Okay, we'll wait for him to give us clearance to start the engines, and then we will ask the first officer to begin the engine start. So he's going to set this as start switches, and we'll introduce the fuel.
You are clear behind, and you can start your engines at your discretion.
Start engine 1.
Starting engine 1.
Okay, so he will do that now. There we go, and we'll keep an eye for 25% and then introduce the fuel.
Oil pressure.
And again, in our assist, it tells us exactly what we should be doing. Okay, there's 25 coming up now. And then we wait for our first officer to announce that the engine is stable, and we go ahead and do the same thing for engine 2. Now our pushback is just about done.
Pushback complete. Set parking brakes, please.
Brake set.
Roger. Okay, the tow bar is disconnected and the equipment is clear. We'll see you on the right
Starter
side
cut
with the
out.
pin.
Clear to disconnect.
Thanks. Have a good flight. See you later.
Number 1 stable.
Start engine 2.
Starting engine 2. Oil pressure.
Right, so now we just wait for our engine startup sequence to complete, and then we can go ahead and prepare for taxiing out.
Starter cutout. Number 2 stable.
All portable electronic equipment
That's
and mobile
5.
phones should be switched off as we are now about to start our pre-flight safety briefing. We are now going to take you through our safety procedures and equipment. As this information is for your benefit, we ask you to watch and listen carefully. The safety card in your seat area shows details of escape routes, oxygen masks, and the life jacket.
Flight controls check
It
complete.
also shows the bracing position, which you must adopt in an emergency landing. On the main deck, there are 2 exits at the rear of the first class cabin and 2 at the front
Before
and
taxi
rear
checklist.
of each other cabin.
Generators on, probe heat on, anti-ice off, isolation valve, auto, engine start switches, continuous, recall,
In the unlikely
Checked.
event of having to
checked,
use
order
big
brake,
slides,
RTO,
all hand baggage behind and
engine start
slide
lever,
shoes as they
Idle
prepare to
detent.
slide.
flight controls,
Checked.
ground equipment,
Please now ensure that your table is folded away. Your
Clear.
seat back is upright.
clear
armrest
before taxi
down,
checklist
and
completed.
belt fastened.
Request taxi clearance.
Seatbelt is fastened and
Ground,
adjusted
good morning,
like this.
Springbok 1, ready to
And
taxi.
unfastened like this. When the fasten seatbelt signs are on,
Cleared to tax, Springbok 1,
Clear left.
For
Clear
your own
right.
comfort and safety, we recommend you keep your seatbelt fastened at all times and visible to avoid being disturbed in flight. If the cabin air supplies fail, oxygen will be provided. Masks like this will appear automatically. Stay in your seat and pull a mask towards you. This will open your oxygen supply. Place the mask over your mouth and nose like this and breathe normally, adjusting the band to secure it. Do make sure your own mask is fitted before helping anyone else. Your life jacket is underneath or beside your seat.
Okay, we got a pretty short
In the event
taxi
of
here.
landing on water,
So
remove the life
we'll
jacket
do the
from its
before
container
takeoff
and put it
checklist
over your head.
fairly
Fasten
soon.
tapes round your waist and tie them securely in a double bow at the side. To inflate, pull the red toggle as shown.
Before takeoff checklist.
The air can be popped up
Flaps.
by using the mouthpiece.
Flaps 5, green light.
There is a whistle here for
Stabilizer trim.
4.3 units
Do not
set.
deflate your life jacket until you are outside the aircraft. We will
4.3
supply life
units.
coats for babies and life
Before
jackets
takeoff
for
checklist completed.
Finally, ladies and gentlemen, please study the safety card and take notice of the fasten seatbelt sign.
So one thing is we are going to have to
May we
wait for the
remind you
cabin
that
to
electrical portable
give us the
items
indication
such as
that they
gates,
are
keys,
ready.
and word processing equipment
And you
may
can hear they are
interfere
still
with the
running the
aircraft
safety
system
briefing, so
and
we
must be
might have to
switched
wait a
off
little
during
bit for them
takeoff
to
and
be
landing.
good to go.
Portable telephones must be switched off while the aircraft engines are running. As this is a no smoking service, the no smoking signs will remain on for the duration of the flight. Smoking is not permitted at any time.
Right, but not long, and we will be powering our way out of the rain. Although it seems to be starting to clear out that way. Okay, safety briefing's done, so hopefully they let us know shortly. They are good to go. There we go.
Flight deck. Okay, thanks. Captain, the cabin is secure.
Request takeoff clearance.
Tower, Springbok 1, ready for departure. Cleared for departure. Springbok 1.
Runway entry procedure.
Okay. Cabin crew, take your seats. Clear on the approach. Ready to go.
Takeoff. I always
Thrust
forget
set.
the auto throttle because I thought the first officer was supposed to do it, but it seems not.
80 knots. V1, rotate.
V2.
Positive rate.
Gear up.
Gear up. 400 feet.
Select autopilot on.
Autopilot on.
Flaps on.
Speed checked.
Flaps up.
Flaps 1 set. Speed checked. Flaps up set.
After takeoff checklist.
Engine bleeds on. Backs. Auto. Landing gear. Up and off. Flaps. Up. No lights. After takeoff checklist complete. Happy to release the cabin crew?
No thanks.
Okay.
So that's interesting. You'll see he's probably going to ask that again when we get to 10,000 feet. And I've found that it seems to do it twice, even if you say no. So I said no this time because I said yes last time. So I want to see what happens now that I say no. Well, obviously, because I said no, he didn't say anything to the cabin crew. But let's see if he asks again. Transition set standard.
Standard set.
Okay, coming up to 10,000 feet, he should switch off the landing lights. And let's see if he asks again to release the cabin crew.
$10,000.
There we go, landing lights off.
Happy to release the cabin?
There we go. Yes, please.
Okay.
Right, now it's just a case of powering up to our cruise altitude, cruising along for a few minutes at 32,000 feet, and I will join you again when it's time to run through the descent preparation with the FS2Crew. Alright, so let's go ahead and set up for our descent. I also want to test something. If we give control to the first officer, can we then set commands on the MCP via him? You have control?
I have control.
Set altitude 9,000. Okay, so it doesn't work, which is interesting because I would assume that if you hand over control, he's now the pilot flying, and then he would make MCP adjustments. But anyway. Okay, so we intercept at 9,000. Then we need 1091. Okay, that's set. Course is 034. There we go. And then let's come down here. We'll do flaps 30, 138. Are you ready for the approach briefing?
Go ahead.
So I just want to test because I believe that the auto brake that he sets is based on this. So let's do auto brake 1 for this just to test this out. Single engine taxi we're not doing, we're going into a gate. Minimums. We'll do cat 1. And it's 200. See, I'm not sure how you tell that this is decision heights or MDA. Okay, final approach fix altitude is 9,000. Missed approach, we climb to 8,000. Runway's dry, APU, cool. Oh, I don't have the button to run this. That's interesting. Oh, there we go. That's weird.
Are you ready for the approach brief?
Okay.
The arrival routing will be via the ATC assigned star, complying with all published speeds and altitude restrictions. For an ILS approach, planning a flaps 30 landing. Final approach fixed altitude is 9,000 feet. Decision altitude is 200 feet. Missed approach altitude is 8,000 feet. Taxi route in will be assigned by ATC. We'll be arriving at gate. Descent speeds and navigation radios are set. Airport NOTAMs have been reviewed. Any questions, comments or concerns?
No questions.
Approach brief complete.
Right, so there's our approach done. Okay, so minimum selector is set. Transition level on FMC descent page. Our transition level is 8,000. It's here. There we go. Not 18. Didn't actually mean to do that. I meant to do that. Okay, that's done, and approach brief is done. I have control.
You have control.
Descent checklist.
Pressurization. Landing altitude is 5550 feet. Recall checked. Auto brake. Level 1. Landing data.
Set and checked.
VREF 137 minimums 200 feet. Approach briefing.
Completed.
Descent checklist completed.
Right, so he did set auto brake level 1, so that does work. I was right. Okay, I want to take out Edlig and just go direct like that, just to make this nice and quick. That might be cutting it a little fine, but we'll see. It should be cool. Okay, so we've got 10,000 feet-ish to descend. And I'll catch up with you when it's time for the approach. Alright, so we're coming up to 10,000 feet. And then we're going to turn right to intercept the ILS. Our first officer should turn on the landing lights at 10,000 feet.
1,000 to level. Flight level 100. Final approach fix. Height checked. Missed approach. Altitude not set.
Okay, we're going to bring the speed down and start getting flaps and gear out before we make this turn. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to slow down. And then once the glide slope once the localizer starts moving, we'll arm the approach as well. Flaps 1.
Speed checked.
Flaps 5.
Flaps 1 set. Speed checked. Flaps 5 set.
Arm approach. Gear down, flaps 15.
Speed checked. Gear down. Flaps 15 set.
Transition set altimeter 1025.
One, 0, 2, 5 set.
Approach checklist
Altimeters.
1025 set.
1, 0, 2, 5 set. Approach checklist complete.
2,500.
Radio altimeter alive. Cabin crew, take your seats.
Flaps 25.
Speed checked. Flaps 25 set. Speed checked. Flaps 30 set.
Landing checklist.
Engine start switches.
Continuous.
Speed brake.
Armed.
Landing gear.
Down.
Flaps. Landing checklist completed.
1,000.
1,000 feet. Stable. $500 feet. Speed brake up. Reverse is normal. Auto brake disarmed. 60 knots.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the captain and the entire crew, we'd like to welcome you to our destination. For your safety, please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened, leaving all items and hand luggage safely stowed until the seatbelt signs have been switched off. Before you leave the aircraft, please ensure you have all your personal items and hand luggage with you. Please be careful when opening overhead lockers as items may fall out causing injury. We'd like to remind you that smoking is not permitted designated smoking area. If you require assistance when you leave the aircraft, please contact a member of our ground staff. If you're connected to another flight today and hold a boarding card and transfer wallet advising you of your departure terminal, please follow the signs of the flight connection. This will lead you on to your departure terminal, and please check your gate number in the departure lounge. To avoid missing your onward flight, we strongly recommend that you go straight to your departure terminal.
APU on the buses.
Those of you who do not have a boarding card, please go directly to the flight connections desk. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the entire airline, thank you very much for choosing to fly with us today, and we hope to see you again in the near future. Thank you.
Three minutes.
lights and doors.
Check. Cabin crew disarm doors and cross-check.
Right, so we've shut down the engines, we're on the APU, flight director off, parking brake is set, and we'll just wait for the first officer to finish his flow. And then we'll do the shutdown check, and that'll bring us to the end of this flight. Shutdown checklist.
Fuel pumps off. Probe heat off. Hydronic panel set. Flaps
Up.
Parking brake
Set.
engine start lever.
Cut off.
Weather radar
Off. Set and checked.
off. Shutdown checklist complete.
Right, and there you'll see it's actually primed for you. If you're doing another leg, you can just say let's start setting up and start everything again from the beginning. But that is going to bring us to the end of this video and to the end of this tutorial for FS2Crew for the PMDG 737. I really hope that this helped you get into FS2Crew. It is a fantastic add-on. I've been using it for over 10 years now, and I'm really excited to have this for the 737. It does make flying a complex aircraft like this all that more immersive and more enjoyable. So thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, I really hope you found this useful. If you did, you know what to do down below. If you have any questions, post them in the comments. I will try my best to answer questions. Obviously, I'm not the developer for the software, so there will be questions that I cannot answer. Otherwise, if you want official support from FS2Crew, they have mentioned that the best place to do that is on their Discord, and I will link that down below. Right, but that's it from me for this video. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.